So brothers and sisters, when it comes to the Mass, the Eucharist, which is the center of our Catholic worship life, I see three challenges. First of all, to get here, when we are here, to be actively involved in the Mass, and then when we leave here, to live the Mass. So first of all, to get here. So you are here, so you have met the first challenge. And all of you who are joining us on live stream, I'm delighted at least you're joining us in that way, and hopefully you can be here physically with us soon. The second challenge is, of course, that when we actually come here to be actively engaged in the Mass, at any given Mass we can be actively engaged, singing, praying, listening, receiving the Eucharist with devotion, or we can be kind of what we call silent spectators. We're here, but our mind's somewhere else. We're not really singing and so forth. So that second challenge is to be actively engaged in the Mass. And the third challenge is that when we go forth from here, our call is to live the Mass, as we say, to allow the mind and the heart of Christ to inform our thinking, our speaking, and our actions at home, with our neighbors, in the workplace, in our place of recreation, and even how we think about the hot-button issues in our nation, like abortion, capital punishment, immigration, climate control, and race issues. Now, as you probably know, when a priest begins to speak about these issues, people say, I don't want to hear about politics and church. And my answer is yes, these are political issues. They divide us very much as a nation and even as a church. But they are not just political issues, they are also moral issues, they are also gospel issues. And how we think and feel and respond to these issues, each one of them, says a whole lot about who we are as Christians. As our church teaches us, our faith should inform our thinking on all issues, including these issues. When it comes to forming our conscience on these issues, and it's a very important question, when it comes to forming our conscience, our mind, our thinking, our acting on any of these issues, how does that happen? What sources do we use to inform our thinking, our talking, and our action when it comes to all of these issues, all of which are life issues, by the way. All of these are life issues, including climate control, which is, of course, God's creation. We're called to care for God's earth. So we could allow the gospel and the teaching of the church to inform us, or maybe it's social media, maybe it's what's on Fox News or on CNN that might be informing our conscience when it comes to any of these issues. So really, ideally for us as Catholic Christians, our conscience on all of these issues and more should be formed by a reflection on the gospel, and then go to the teaching of the church. Because over the decades, our church has actually given us many documents on all of these issues. And of course, the front and center issue these days is the race issue. And, I just found out, shame on me, just a week or so ago, that the church has actually given us a beautiful document on this whole issue of race. Open wide our hearts. The enduring call to love, a pastoral letter on racism. So as I said, I never really wasn't very aware of this until a few days ago. And last night I read several pages, about 10 pages in, and the headings: the Indian experience in America, the African American experience in America, the Hispanic experience in America. And it was made for sad reason, because it really outlined the terrible treatment of these three groups of people in this country. Of course, in the past it was much worse than it is today. But the challenge for us today is to see to what extent is there still mistreatment of these groups or any other group in our country. And probably the clearest example of how it continues would be the example of Mexican workers in our country, especially undocumented workers in our country. And I assume we're all aware that they are grossly underpaid for their work, and very often employed for that particular reason, because they will get a lot of work done for very little wages. So that's, of course, a justice issue. It's a Christian issue, and it's something that should concern us. The vast majority of us here, of course, grew up in middle-class homes. And if we're looking back, depending on our age, looking back over the decades of our lives and maybe growing up, did we notice any racist attitudes or behaviors, words spoken in our home? And that's an interesting question to ask. I ask myself that question. I grew up in Southern Ireland on a farm. There were no black people, no Mexican people there. But as I look back, I grew up in a racist home. Why do I say that? Well, we had farm workers, we had farm laborers, hired hands, and they were treated very much as second-class citizens. So very close to where I slept, next door, we had a horse's stable, and upstairs, that's where John Keating, a wonderful man, slept. He was paid poorly, and definitely he was not seen as our equal. So, of course, when it comes to racism, it can be against other races, but even it applies to the white race as well, especially white poor people, whether it's here or somewhere else. So the invitation there, my brothers and sisters, is to just ponder just our lives past and present, and how and where we are when it comes to the issue of race in our country. We could be just sidetracked by seeing what's going on in Seattle and seeing the group that hijacks or continues to hijack peaceful protesters who are looking for justice. And we shouldn't get sidetracked by them. We should look at what are the real issues people are talking about, and how do we feel about them. So I have a suggestion this week. If we listen a lot to Fox and CNN, I suggest putting the pause button on and instead download this beautiful article, Open Wide Our Hearts, and take time not only to read it, but to reflect on it and to pray on it. And just a final question for your thinking. When it comes to issues, these hot-button issues, and maybe when we find ourselves disagreeing with the church's teaching, why is that? Why are we disagreeing? Is it because we have carefully reflected on these issues, prayed upon these issues, or is it because of what we have heard on social media? Are we being more informed and formed by these sources rather than the sources of our church. So let's just take a moment now to reflect on all of this.